Why do so many women struggle to say no, to speak up for themselves, or prioritize their own needs without feeling guilty? Welcome to the Self Authority Podcast. I'm your host, Elaine Belsen, the Self Authority Coach. Today, I'm joined by boundaries coach, speaker, and host of the podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Barb Nangle. Barb shares the remarkable story of how a relationship with a homeless man led her to confront a lifetime of codependency, people-pleasing, and self-abandonment, and ultimately transform the way she relates to herself and others. We explore why women often define themselves through helping others, how approval-seeking disguises itself as kindness, the difference between external and internal boundaries, and why creating internal safety may be the key to lasting change. Here's my conversation with Barb Nangle. So welcome, Barb. I'm really
Thank
excited
you.
for this
Yeah,
conversation.
me too. I'm so excited for you having your new podcast, and I was honored to be invited.
Thank you. So I always start my podcast episodes with a story, and I know that you have one. So,
Okay, well, I will get into it. So I started my story back in 2015 when I was 52 years old. I hit a codependent bottom, which I will define in case people don't know, because
okay.
even though I had been in therapy since age 15, read a gajillion self-help books and done workshops and workbooks and seminars and groups and blah, 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 I'd never come across this word codependent. So what happened was I had volunteered at my church to lead a project serving homeless people. And around that same time, a homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner. And I remember, and he and I became very friendly. And I remember feeling like, oh, this is like God bringing me a homeless person to help me understand the plight of homeless people from the perspective of an actual homeless person, so that when I'm serving homeless people, I'm serving homeless people, not quote, the homeless. And it actually was true. He was very, very helpful. And about 2 or 3 months into our friendship, we had a really massive snowstorm here in New Haven. So I invited Dan to come and stay at my home. And I now know it is not normal to invite a homeless person to stay in your home. And of course, he said yes. So I did this because he never stayed in homeless shelters, but you cannot not stay in a homeless shelter during a snowstorm. And so he stayed, and then another time and another time. And within a few weeks, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt trapped in my own home.
Yeah.
And this guy messed with my head in a way I had never experienced. So he was a self-proclaimed addict and alcoholic. I now think on reflection, he had some kind of personality disorder.
Mhm.
And one day I was in therapy and I was talking about Dan. And in the middle of a sentence, I stopped and I went, "Oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon?" And my therapist was like, "Yes." So, just in case people aren't familiar with Al-Anon, it's a 12-step recovery program for the loved ones of alcoholics. So, most people have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was the first 12-step recovery program ever created in the 1930s in the US. It was the first time in history that droves and droves and droves of alcoholics got and stayed sober, and it was documented. And the second 12-step recovery program created was Al-Anon for the loved ones of alcoholics. And so some people might wonder, why do the loved ones of alcoholics need a program of recovery? And it's because alcoholism is actually a family disease. We tend to think of it being just about the drinking behavior of the alcoholic. That's really the pinnacle of the symptoms of the problems. And so what happens for the loved ones of alcoholics is they tend to start engaging in controlling behaviors. They try to get the person sober, to stop drinking, to go to meetings, go to detox, etc.
Mhm.
And all of their attention goes on the alcoholic and their behavior, and they get filled with resentment. They get completely exhausted. They ignore themselves and their needs, and they make everything about the alcoholic. Meanwhile, the alcoholic starts to build up resentment against the loved one because they're controlling them And then they use that resentment as an excuse to drink, and then the cycle continues. So I knew about Al-Anon, and whatever I put into Googling, I don't know what it was, but the word codependent came up. And I was like, "Oh, what? What is this word?" So there's a 12-step recovery program called Codependence Anonymous. So I started going to that, and I very quickly felt a sense of relief. I think partly understanding I have this, it's almost like this syndrome that
Mhm.
I have, and that there's a recovery program, that other people have it. And I really, just within a matter of weeks, I remember saying to someone, I think I need to be reparented. I have no idea where I heard that term. I feel like I thought I made it up. I don't know. And then a few weeks into going to CoDA, which is like a abbreviated name for Codependence Anonymous, I went to Cape Cod, Massachusetts to visit a couple of longtime friends, one of whom had been in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, for over 10 years. And she had just raved many times about how utterly transformed her life was. And I was like, "You're going to love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous." And she was like, "Oh, this is great. Let's see if we can find a CoDA meeting here while you're here and we'll go together." And she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I knew of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. I now know it's actually Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families.
Yep.
Because when I heard of ACA, I didn't think I qualified, but I knew that she did because her dad's an alcoholic. So I'm like, "I'll go for you," because, that's what I'm like. I'm super accommodating, or I was. And we walk in, and in the opening readings, they said something like, "We reparent ourselves." And I was like, "What?" And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. And Heidi tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that, but I bought the literature, came home to New Haven, started going to an ACA meeting. About 3 weeks later, a women's ACA meeting began. I still go to that meeting. And a few weeks after that, I got together with 3 other women in that group and decided to work through the ACA 12-step workbook.
Mhm.
And I just like, this was what I had been looking for my entire life. What I now know is that ACA is a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. So I was doing that work for about a year. I continued to go to CoDA, but I just went to meetings. I didn't do anything outside. I didn't do readings or anything like that. I wasn't working the steps. And I decided after a year to let go of CoDA because it was maybe a 75% fit, whereas ACA was a 100% fit. And that turned out to be sort of, I call it a higher powered moment, because one of the women that I was working the 12 steps with in ACA had begun sharing about her relationship with food. And then she started going to Overeaters Anonymous, and she was trying to like gently kind of get me to go with her. And I went to a meeting and I went, "Oh my God, I am a compulsive overeater." And I didn't even know that was a thing. So I joined OA, Overeaters Anonymous. I'm now down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for over 8 years. We call it abstinent in that program. It's equivalent to being sober in Alcoholics
Right.
Anonymous. I've been abstinent for over 10 years.
And that
My
makes so much sense because I do think that
Yeah,
people use different ways of coping. It might be a
yeah,
substance, but it could also be
yeah.
food.
Oh, I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s. I smoked bales of weed for years. I smoked cigarettes secretly for like 20 years. I mean, believe me, the food was like the last one that I kind of brought on, and the longest, it was the longest standing one.
Uh-huh.
But I essentially, I learned to build healthy boundaries kind of as a byproduct of the 12-step recovery programs I was in. It's not like someone sat me down. I was like, "Okay, Barb, we're going to teach you how to build boundaries." And because I think of my core wound, well, my core wound is trauma, but for me, it manifested as my core wound is codependence. And boundaries are essentially the antidote to codependence.
Right.
So as I got a handle on my boundaries, I was like, "This is amazing." So I started reading about boundaries, and it helped me to retroactively understand like what happened such that I grew up with no boundaries, and then what happened such that I built boundaries. And as I was doing the readings, I started drawing visuals because I'm a visual person, which I kind of didn't really know about myself, to like visually depict if this was in the physical world, what would it look like? And those drawings turned into handouts, which turned into a workbook, which is now the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. So, about 2.5 years into my recovery journey, I had been working at Yale University at the time. I was a program coordinator and running mostly college access programs in urban districts here in Connecticut. And we've been grant funded forever. So I got laid off and I found my way into the world of startups and innovation and entrepreneurship in New Haven and at Yale, and decided to start my own coaching and consulting business. And I very quickly started my podcast, which is called Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. And I really started, Elaine, because I was like, okay, I've had this massive transformation from the 12 steps of recovery. And I learned so many things about myself. I learned so many coping skills, so many life skills, so many tips and tricks and mindset shifts in recovery, none of which ever came up in that 37 years of therapy and all that other stuff. And here's how I think of it, Elaine. All of that self help like scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery melted the iceberg of my life. So I wanted to get the wisdom I was learning in recovery out to the world. Never occurred to me it would have anything to do with my business. And now it's the number one way that I get clients. And when I originally started as a coach, I was just sort of generally coaching people. And then as I got further into the work, I realized as an entrepreneur, you need to have some kind of a niche. And it just made sense for me to be a boundaries coach. But what happened, there's so many changes, which I'm sure will come out in the conversation. I think one of the ones that people like to hear about the most that is evidence of my healthy boundaries is that I'm now in the first and only healthy romantic relationship of my life. I
Mhm.
happen to date men. So he and I have been together for 7.5 years. And prior to that, I've never been married. I've lived with 4 or 5 guys. I've had lots of dating relationships, many boyfriends, quite a number of friends with benefits. Every single one of them was dysfunctional. When I did my relationship inventory and recovery, I could literally see the codependence get worse and worse and worse. And what's funny is when I first did those inventories, I thought my codependence was relegated just to my romantic relationships. Oh, no. My codependence was with my family, with my friends, in my umpteen different volunteer organizations, in my colleague relationships, literally everywhere. It was at its worst in my romantic relationships, which makes it perplexing to me of what was it about Dan that caused me to hit my codependent bottom. And I think it was just like one of those universal things where like the universe or higher power was like, you're ready to hit a codependent bottom. Let's make it happen quick by a narcissistic addict who's also an alcoholic who messes with your head in your home where you would like to feel safe. And what I think of as my codependent bottom was, so I'm in my basement right now, but right over here is my laundry. And I was standing in front of my laundry. I don't know what we were talking about, but some exchange I had with Dan literally made my knees buckle. And I fell to my knees and I said to him, I'm having an emotional flash. I'm having a flashback, is what I said. And I meant I'm having an emotional flashback. I don't know how I knew that. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know what it was, but I knew. He thought I was having a drug flashback. And what was wild was he leapt into action. He was like, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you touching? Look at my, like, it was like, get in touch with your senses. And it like snapped me out of it. But what was wild was he was the laziest mofo I have ever met in my life. So to see him leap into action was like, what is that? And I think that might have also been what snapped me out of it. And so what was happening is I now know from my trauma recovery is that was a trauma response. Didn't know that. It has to do with my abandonment wound from childhood. So what was happening in that moment is that I was feeling both. I cannot let go of this man. I have to save him.
Hmm.
And I cannot keep this man around. He's killing me. And it happened in this one moment that those two forces came together and caused my knees to buckle. It's hard for me to remember because people always wanna know how'd you get rid of him. Like, I don't remember all the details. If you care to go, I mean, I can share what I do remember, but I mean, I was just a complete mess. Um, But I did eventually get rid of him, and I heard a few years later that he somehow made his way to Texas, and then I later heard that he died. I don't know how. I
Mhm.
mean, I can imagine it was probably some kind of an overdose or accident or something like that. I'm not really sure. But to this day, I think of him as actually an angel for me that
Mhm.
caused me to hit my codependent bottom, that utterly transformed my life and now allows me to carry the message of recovery to other people who still suffer. So I do that in 12-step recovery, like as a sponsor, as someone who goes to meetings and gives service there. And then out in the world in my career, I do it as a boundaries coach. So my target market is professional women who say yes when they really want to say no and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. Because that's me. That's who I was. It doesn't mean there are other people who don't need boundaries, but I'm like, I'm speaking to you as a professional woman who used to say yes when I wanted to say no and who neglected myself. And who, when I was working at Yale and started building boundaries, I saw this ripple effect of my boundaries on my team, on my project, and my organization. And at first I was like, wait a minute, what's happening? Like, I'm the only one in recovery here. Why are things changing? And it's
Mhm.
because it's a perfect example of how when you change the dynamics of your interactions, everything around you changes. So you
Absolutely.
can't control people, but you
Right.
can influence people. So I
Absolutely.
think I know I've said a lot, so I'll stop there and I'm sure more will come out.
Yeah, there's an expression, that when you drop a pebble into water, it causes ripples.
Yes. Yes.
I have so many questions, but we are talking about women. So, what do you think it is that makes it so difficult for women to set boundaries? I know that's
So
a
yeah,
loaded.
well, macro issue is patriarchy. Right? So women are socialized to be the givers, that it's to be a good girl means you're kind and you're nice and you're helpful and you don't make waves and you don't make people feel difficult. I've been listening to a lot of novels and reading novels that just for some reason are taking place in like the mid 1800s up to like the 1920s. And
Mhm.
oh my God, to listen to some of the things that, there's so many things, so many social mores about what it means to be a good woman. It doesn't mean
Mm.
there aren't them about men, but the restrictions are just ridiculous. And so that's just in our culture. It's in our DNA. And so, I think one really good example of that is the word selfish. You don't ever hear men worried about being called selfish. I had a client, Elaine, who said to me, I'd rather be called a whore than selfish. Like, what is going on in
Wow.
our society that a woman would rather be called a whore than selfish? So it's almost like an epithet. You want to put a woman in her place, tell her she's selfish. And so I know I had that same issue when I was learning to build healthy boundaries, that because I was taught, like, be helpful. I'm a helpful person. This is my identity. And I thought that I was helpful because I was nice. Like, I literally remember saying to somebody one time, I'm nice. And now I know that it was approval seeking. I had no idea. I remember when I heard the word people pleaser, the term people pleaser early in recovery, I don't think I'd ever heard it. I did not identify, but I was like, oh, my friend Joanne, she's a people pleaser. Well, guess what? Quintessential people pleaser right here. I
Mhm.
had no idea. I thought I was being helpful. And I remember saying to this woman, this was in CoDA, really early in my recovery. And I said to her, okay, I'm starting to see that there's like this continuum of helpfulness, whereby on one end, we've got kindly, helpful, functional, healthy behavior, helping behavior. On the other hand, we've got this dysfunctional, enabling, rescuing, fixing, saving, codependent behavior. And I'm pretty sure I get the difference between the two ends of the continuum. It's in the middle where I get confused. Like, where do you flip over from being just a normal, helpful person to being rescuing? And she said, Barb, it really depends. Why are you doing it? Why are you helping? Are you doing it because you truly want to be helpful? Or are you doing it because you want them to like you? And I was like, I am totally doing it because I want to be helpful. Well, let me tell you something, Elaine. That question like percolated in my mind. And as time went on, I was like, whoa, oh my God. And it's not, I want people to like me. It's really about approval. So I want them to think that I'm helpful. that I'm kind, that I am reliable, that I'm dependable, that I can be counted on, and all that. And that was really humbling to see that.
Mhm.
And so, one of the big questions that I've learned from that experience to ask myself, what is the healthy boundary for me, or what is the healthy behavior, is what are my motives? Why am I doing this? If I'm doing this more for someone's approval and less for being helpful,
Mhm.
that's cool. And this doesn't mean I want people's approval. I don't need it with claws the way
Right.
that I used to. And this leads me to the big shift that happened for me. I think the core shift that I had that enabled me to go from 50 something years of no boundaries to having such a healthy boundaries that I am now a coach and a speaker and an author on boundaries is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other people do. And this doesn't mean I don't care what other people think. Of course I do. But what it means is I used to be willing to compromise my integrity. So I would lie and say things were okay. I would actually volunteer for things I didn't want to do. Then I'd probably complain about you behind your back. People would ask, how are you? How are you? I'm dying inside, but I'd be like, I'm fine. So that's called lying. And then there was my people pleasing. So I went about my behavior with the express purpose of getting people to like me. Now, this was subconscious. I did not know it
Right.
was until I did. So that's called manipulation. And what's funny is the thing I was most worried about, Elaine, was I don't want people to think I'm a bad person. And if you were to list behaviors of bad people, I'm guessing lying and manipulating would probably go up there. And then the other thing, when I stopped compromising my integrity, and started really focusing on what I thought. I had all these feelings and I learned to manage my own feelings. I didn't take the guilt that came up as an instruction. Barb, you've done something wrong. You're a bad person and you need to fix it. I was like, oh, I'm breaking a pattern here. I'm
Mhm.
stop abandoning myself. I didn't take someone pushing back against my boundary or being upset with me for having a boundary as cause for changing my plan. I learned that discomfort does not mean danger, right? I feel uncomfortable when you're not approving of me, but I don't need to take that as this means you've done something wrong. So that discomfort for me is an old pattern. What happens in my body is as if I'm in a cave and there's a saber-toothed tiger, right? I'm
Uh,
in a house in modern day America with
Yep.
plumbing,
Yep.
like my life is not under threat, but that's what it feels like.
Uh-huh.
So my nervous system and my brain have not been updated from evolution, have not been updated from maybe it was like for me, I wasn't bullied, but like the bully in third grade, from the parents who don't know how to parent, from the neglect and the emotional invalidation I experienced in my family. So I get to update my own nervous system in my brain by stopping abandoning myself and not using those feelings
Mm.
and creating a sense of internal safety. And you mentioned before we started recording, you mentioned internal boundaries, which I was so glad you did because they were hands down the most impactful boundaries for me.
Right.
But the thing is, you can't create this sense of internal safety by focusing on the outside world, which is what people who are codependent do. We focus on what does he need? What does she need? What do they need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need? What does the cause need? Where we completely pay no attention to what we need. And so internal safety is really knowing when discomfort comes, I've got my own back. It doesn't mean you're happy all the time, you're always calm all the time, you never have discomfort. It means when you have discomfort, you stay with yourself. You don't give up on your boundary. You don't violate your values. You don't violate your whatever rules. Maybe you're in the job, in the on the workplace. You don't step outside of your job description because you think it's going to make your colleagues like you,
Right.
because it's not your job to do that. You stay with yourself. And that has been huge. And for me, the internal boundaries have been the biggest part of creating the internal safety. So what I mean by that, like I've learned, like I have all kinds of internal boundaries, but some of them, most of them really only affect me. but some of them also affect other people. So I'll give a
Right.
couple of examples. For
Yeah, I was
me,
gonna ask you, what does it sound like in
yeah,
head? Yeah.
yeah. So for me, I have always thought of myself as a very positive, optimistic person, felt like a powerful woman of agency, never been a wallflower, never let people walk all over me, even though I was a people pleaser. I was shocked when I got in recovery to learn that not only do I catastrophize about the future all the time, but I ruminated about the past a lot. So, what that does is it jacks up your nervous system all the time. So, I had to first notice that I was doing it and then stop. So, stopping doing it is called an internal boundary.
Right,
So,
right.
pretty sure that I don't ruminate at all anymore about the past, but I do still sometimes catastrophize. It has drastically reduced. I would say it was like 95% down. And then in the last couple of years, I've gotten it down to like maybe 99% down because I've done a lot more work. I do stuff for my nervous system to create new neural pathways so that my pattern is not automatically go into the catastrophizing. But internal boundaries are, oh, I'm thinking those thoughts. So let me soothe my nervous system. For me, my number one intervention is put my hand on my chest, feel my lungs rise and fall, feel my heartbeat, be in the present moment.
Mhm.
Ground my feet, get in touch with my senses and what I say to myself.
Right.
It's not happening to me, like, if someone else is really I used to get torn up when something was happening to somebody else. It's not happening to me, or that's not my responsibility, or I'm not a bad person for doing this, or discomfort does not mean danger. Whatever I need to say to myself and what I need to do for my body. So the ruminating, catastrophizing are examples of I've often called them boundaries of self-containment. So
Mhm.
these are things we need to either contain or stop doing. So those are boundaries of self-containment that are really only affecting me. Nobody else knows what I'm
Right.
doing, right? But then there are boundaries of self-containment that actually do affect other people in addition to me. And I will say my best example is gossip.
Okay, well,
So,
before you go into that, I do
okay.
want to go back about this internal boundaries, and can you share a few examples of what it sounds like when you don't have internal boundaries? Because I know you've done this
Yeah.
on LinkedIn
Yeah.
on some
Yeah.
of the posts and
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, one of my worst things was like, there's not going to be enough. And it could be money, it could be food, it could be time. But I would start thinking of how there's not going to be enough. And I would spend all this time in my mind thinking about all the disastrous things that are going to happen when there's not enough money. And then all scheming for ways that I could possibly make money. Or I would be trying to solve other people's problems that maybe didn't even perceive their situation as problematic and definitely didn't even ask me for help and would spend an enormous amount of emotional and mental energy on that stuff. So those are a couple of examples. Is that clear?
Yeah, yeah. You've talked, about, I can't remember some examples, but just things that women say to themselves
Mhm.
oftentimes,
Yeah.
I think are examples of not setting boundaries.
Yeah. So, one from a client, that just this last week, we had a conversation. So one of her closest friends from high school, this is a woman in her 50s, her closest friends from high school is having a mental health crisis right now. And she was in an institution. And my client went to go visit her in the morning. And then she was slated to go visit her again in the evening. And if you've never been at a mental health unit, people listening, it is my brother was bipolar. I went to see him many times. It's not a good place for anybody, especially the patients.
Mhm. Yep.
She really didn't want to go back. And she knew it's not good for me. It's not good for her. It's not good for my family.
Mhm.
But she was like, I'm a helper person. It's what I do. Well, then her adult son calls and says, hey, mom, is it okay if I stop by around dinner time? And, I need to blah, blah, blah. I don't remember what it was. And so she was like, okay, I really want to see my son. So she decided on the thing that really felt right to her. And even though intellectually she understood this is the best thing for me, for my friend, and for my family, she still had all this kind of guilt about it. So she was telling herself, I'm not being a good friend. I'm being a bad person. I'm a helper person. Why am I not helping? So we actually broke down what her definition of being a helper person is. This is
Mhm.
her definition. I help people who cannot or will not help themselves. I help people to the detriment of me and my family. I do not help myself. So she had this incredibly narrow and rigid definition of what it means to be a helper person.
Right.
And it didn't matter that, okay, maybe she knew it wouldn't help her friend that night. But the reason she felt guilt was because this was about her identity. My identity is
Exactly.
I am a helper person, right? So
Exactly.
she's raking herself over the coals. And when we looked at this is what internally is your definition of being a helper person. And it's
Mm.
bullshit.
Right.
It's like when you look at it with your rational brain. So
Right.
this brings me to, I
Yeah.
feel like one of the greatest distances in the universe is between the head and the heart. Like just because you know something doesn't mean you can do it.
Right. Exactly.
And this is where the internal boundaries come in so well because
Right.
your body tells you
That's
when
right.
things are off.
Right. And we don't
You
listen
get to
to it.
listen to it. Well,
Yeah.
you get to learn to
Yeah.
listen to it. And that's
Yes,
what like
exactly.
internal safety is you start listening to your body and you
Right.
start
Not
soothing your body instead of
right.
like I basically grew up learning you just deal with whatever comes at you. Just deal with it. You power through and you don't complain and you don't cry and you just do it. And now I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not just doing it. Like, I need a break. Like, I need to relax. I need to make decisions from calm, not from overwhelm or not from a sense of urgency. Because when I make those decisions out of a sense of urgency or feeling like things are an emergency, I'm abandoning myself because I'm not thinking clearly because
Mhm.
I can't, because I'm in fight or flight mode. And that's not how the brain works.
Right.
So
So
is it
going
okay if
back
I
to yeah, go
the
back. Yeah.
okay, so the boundaries of self-containment, that this is an internal boundary, but it affects other people too. So gossip is my best example. So I had no idea that me talking about my boss behind her back for 19 years was gossip. And I am not a dumb person. But I thought, "Oh, I'm just commiserating or I'm just complaining." Like, you've been doing it for 19 years, Bob. I think you've gotten the commiseration down. I think you've gotten the venting down and stuff. And what I learned in my ACA program is that I'm a product of my environment. So what happened to me, Elaine, is that I grew up in a family that engaged in indirect communication. So if I had a problem with you, Elaine, I was not going to talk to you about that problem. I was going
Mhm.
to talk to everybody around you, and I wasn't going to talk about the problem. I was going to talk about you.
Right.
So what I did as a person, as an adult, was I talked about people behind their back. I didn't engage in direct communication. I didn't go to my boss and say, "Hey, this isn't really working. Can we find something that doesn't?" And what's actually worse, which I realized over time, is that I was there. My boss is the only one there longer than me. I had purview over everything. She was the only one that was above me. So we had a research and evaluation team and we had a program team, and I was on both of those. Nobody else was. They were on one or the other. And we also, because we're at Yale, we had every year a crop of pre-doctoral psychology fellows and every 2 years a crop of postdoctoral psychology fellows. So we had young adults coming through being trained, and I created a culture of expectation. We focus on problems, not solutions. We talk about the boss behind her back and we blame her for everything. Not one of those clinical psychologists ever said to me, "This is problematic." So I basically taught them, "You should complain about your boss behind your back." And I just created this culture of expectation. And so when I stopped gossiping, it had a huge effect on me and my team. Now, let me tell you, it was exceedingly difficult for me to stop.
Hmm.
And I had to work very closely with my sponsor in recovery to stop it. I had to think about, like, why am I doing it? What are the payoffs? And I remember when I started, I did some research and I'm like, what is gossip and what's not? And how do you stop? And it was like, well, when you're solution oriented, it may not be gossip. So here's what I did. I was like, I kept talking about it, but then I like threw some solution in there. And then later I was like, okay, that's not what's called for here. And that's when it made me realize, like, oh my God, gossip, so good. Why does it feel so good? So I
Mm,
started talking to other fellows in recovery, and one of them said, "Well, you get to make yourself feel better than other people." And I was like, "Oh, ew."
mm,
Humbling. And then someone said, "You get to continue blaming other people for your problems." And I was like, ding, 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 ding. That was it. Like, I got to make my boss be the problem, and I don't have to address anything else. I don't have to change. I get to blame her. Well, that's called victim mentality, which for me, hands down, the biggest paradigm shift of my recovery was coming out of victim mentality. So when I stopped gossiping, my closest group of colleagues, which were mostly admin people, I sat them down. I said, "Y'all know that I'm in recovery. I'm trying to change my ways. And I've realized that I've been gossiping about our boss. And I'm really making an effort to not do that. So please do me a favor. And if you hear me gossiping about her, do this, wag your finger. Don't say anything to me because I'll be flooded with guilt and shame, but you'll give me the signal." And what I was doing, Elaine, was not just asking them to help me, but I was alerting them, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. So don't
right.
do this with me. And what I started to see was I was waiting around for my boss to change for 19 years. She was the
Mhm,
same person that she had been the entire time that I had worked there.
mhm,
And so then I started stepping in and taking responsibility for things that were well within my purview. So, for example, with this smaller team, I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a 15-minute check in meeting every Monday morning, unless we don't need to. Every other Wednesday, when we don't have our large team meeting, we're going to have a small team meeting. When you need to share something with someone on this smaller team, your first thought is, who needs to know? Your second question is, what's the best way to communicate them? Walk into their office, send them an email, pick up the phone. If it's walk into their office or pick up the phone, the first words out of your mouth are going to be, do you have a moment?
mhm,
And what ended up happening was, instead of running into each other in the stairway and having a spontaneous meeting, and we would have meetings in planned meeting time and exchange information instead of sitting around and complaining on our boss because she was always late to meetings or didn't even show up for them. Or when she was in the meetings, she would make an agenda, but we wouldn't stick to it and we would just chat. So therefore, we needed to have meetings in the kitchen, in the stairway, and in the lobby and stuff because we weren't having meetings. So now that switched. We started having meetings in meetings. And then when we ran into each other in the stairway, we could just chat and keep up. So morale went up, productivity went up, job satisfaction went for the small people, the small group of people. And this, I'm talking, this happened in about a 3-month period of time. It was astonishing. And I was like, so this is my internal boundary of, I'm not going to gossip anymore.
mm,
And let me tell you, this was brutal for me. It was really hard because, first of all, just digesting I gossip was awful, humbling. And then realizing it felt good to do and then stopping. And I remember saying to my sponsor when we were working on, I'm like I wasn't just working on stopping gossiping. I was working on stopping other dysfunctional things. But I remember
right,
saying to her, I feel like if I don't engage in these patterns anymore, I won't know who I am. I feel naked and exposed because this is who I am. And who I am is different now. Like, I've established my real identity, my authentic identity. And for me, it has everything to do with boundaries. Like,
yep,
I've determined, where does Barb end and other people begin? In other words, what are the boundaries of Barb? I didn't know that I wasn't doing that. I didn't know that I wasn't living on purpose. And I am now.
wow. When you talk about identity, that is just so much a part of it, and
Mm.
people or women have a difficult time, I think, setting boundaries in large part because of how it reflects on them and their sense of
Right.
self.
Exactly. Right.
Yep,
And this is that I care more what other people think of me than what I think of me thing that I was talking about. It
right,
not the way you perceive me is more
right,
important than the way I perceive me. And here's a good example
right,
of that. When
right.
I look back now, I can say to you, Elaine, I cared more about people thinking that I was helpful than I cared about actually being helpful. And here's how I know, because I was helpful way beyond being helpful. If you're full of resentment, that you're beyond. Like, resentment is a diagnostic tool. Often, diagnosis, you need a boundary. or you need to
Right.
shore up a boundary,
Right.
right? So if you are full of resentment, like you've gone beyond what is normal for helping. When we're helpful, it's energizing. It feels good. But if you're helping and it feels like shit, something is off. That's probably rescuing or fixing.
Mhm.
If you're doing more, if you're more invested in someone else's life than they are, that's a rescue mission. If you're putting in more than 50% of the effort all the time in any particular situation or relationship, that's a rescue mission. I don't do those anymore. That's all I did before,
Right.
including in my friendships. Like I now know the reason I lost a lot of my friends, and I say I lost them, I don't mean we had a fight. I mean, they just faded away because I stopped doing all the work. I stopped doing all the reaching out and they don't come around anymore. But now that they're out of the way, the people that are my people, the authentic Barb's people can actually get to me because I'm not blocked by the people who were not my authentic people who wanted me to do all the work.
Mhm. Right. I think it's so hard for women to get away from identifying themselves in terms of their relationships with other people.
Mhm.
And like you said, I think a lot of it there's a lot of cultural pressure.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier. You talked about I care more about what I think of me than what other people think of me.
Mhm.
How do you achieve that? For so many women out there listening who are struggling with that.
Yeah. So one day at a time, sometimes one moment at a time, one boundary at a time, one thought at a time.
Mhm.
Um, so when I think back to what I started to realize in recovery that I would see people every single week in recovery, and then we started going out for coffee afterwards. And then I started socializing with them out afterwards. So I saw people very regularly, and there was a mutuality to the friendship. So there was a stark difference between what I was experiencing there and what I was experiencing in my friendships. So I had something to compare to. So that really helped. And so when my friends wouldn't call me back, I started realizing this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to not get them to call back. And I also started to see I was resentful of them for years and I would complain about them to each other, not to the person, but to everybody else. And I realized I don't want to be that kind of person who's complaining like that all the
Right.
time. I'm a positive, optimistic, glass half full person, always have been. And I also complained and blamed and ruminated and catastrophized too. So, it's one thought at a time. Having a support system is really helpful. For me, the women that were in my step group, I think it probably took me a couple of years to realize how important their support was to me. Having a sponsor, whether you have a coach or a therapist or a support group that helps you, when you're learning to change your behavior, it is way better to do it with a group of people or with one person who's been on that journey before you so that they can say, you're doing the right thing. And this change does not happen in a linear fashion. When I
Right.
think about, for me, Elaine, my number one tool I learned in recovery was pausing. When I first learned about it, I was like, this is great. I have no idea how to do it. And so the way it worked for me was I learned that pausing was a thing, and then I could never remember to do it. And then one time I was like, oh, that situation 3 weeks ago would have been a really good time to pause.
Mm.
Noted. And then a little while later, I was like, "Oh, that situation last week would have been a really good time to pause." Noted. And I'm like, "Oh, the time is closing between when I could have paused and when I realized I could have paused." I'm like, "Ooh," I started to get excited. Like maybe I'll remember like before rather than after. And that's precisely what happened. But it doesn't mean I remembered and then I paused from then on. No. I remembered, and then I forgot, and I forgot, and I forgot, and I remembered, and I remembered, and I forgot, and I remembered, and I forgot, remembered, forgot,
Right.
remember.
Right.
Like that's how human change works.
Right.
We want things to happen like that, and they don't, which is why gyms are full until the middle of February, and then they're empty the rest of the year
That's
because we
right.
want the change to happen right away, and that's just not how it happens. That saying, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step," is a saying for a reason. The 1,000-mile journey is made up of lots of individual steps, and all of them are not in the forward direction. I can guarantee you that. And that's just how it works. So learning like an internal boundary is being patient with yourself. I'll tell you, one of the phrases that helped me drastically in early recovery, I was listening to a recovery podcast and the person said this is info, not ammo. And I was like, what? So what that means is when you learn something about yourself that you don't particularly like, you use it as information, not ammunition.
That's
And I was like,
right.
oh my God, this is incredible. Because I didn't know that I beat myself up all the time. So what that means is instead of saying like, oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. I can't fucking
Yep.
believe that I did that. What is the matter with me? I go, oh, what's going on here? What I don't really like what's happening. What could I do differently? So here's how I think about it. If you want to go from self-deprecation to self-compassion, the best way to get there is to build a bridge with curiosity. Here, I love
Yes.
curiosity because it's neutral. So when I say it's
Yeah.
info, not ammo, I'm talking about let's be curious,
That's right.
right? And it's also helpful with other people too. If you have someone around you that irritates you, look at this situation with them and go, this is info, not ammo. What do I learn? Like, what could I do differently?
Mhm.
Not how do I change them because you can't,
Right.
but what could I do differently? And sometimes it's just I change my mind about them. So I'll give an example that actually happened with my boss. So luckily for me, my sponsor that I was working with when I was going through the steps was a boss. And so it was really helpful that my problems were with a boss. And she helped me to see, though it is reasonable in the world, in a professional environment, especially at a place like Yale University, to expect a professional person to show up on time, to do what they say they're going to do, to follow through, to like stick to the agenda at a meeting. That's reasonable. But for my boss, after 19 years of her not doing it, for that individual person, it's unrealistic. So it
Right.
may be reasonable, but it's unrealistic for that woman because she's given me 19 years of evidence she's unreliable.
Right.
So stop expecting her to be reliable. I just kept expecting her to be different.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so having unrealistic expectations was a huge, we called them defects of a character.
Mhm.
I recently heard defaults of character, which I like much better. Because defaults can be changed.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
call them limitations.
yeah, yeah, limitation.
Acknowledging
Yeah,
people's limitations. Yeah.
yeah, right. So just so much that I've learned, and I
Mhm.
would say, I learned so many coping skills and mindset shifts and
Yep.
tips and tricks, etc. But for me, like I said earlier, because my core wound is codependence, learning the boundaries was because boundaries permeate every area of your life. Like there's boundaries for everything.
Right.
And it's really about identity. Like, who am I? I was a chameleon, and I thought that was good. It's not because you think you can fit anywhere, everywhere. No, you can't. Right. So when I was in my drinking days, I started drinking beer because that's what everyone drank. Well, then I dated a guy who was a wine connoisseur, so I drank wine. Then I dated a guy who drank Jack Daniels, so I drank Jack and Diet Coke. Then I dated a guy who was a beer connoisseur, so then I learned I like wheat beers. I couldn't even drink my own damn drink. Like, that is how much of a chameleon I was. And like multiply that times whatever 10,000 things we do in our lives. And at the same time, Elaine, I always felt like a powerful woman of agency. So can you imagine what kind of a powerful woman of agency I could have been back then if I had my own like authentic identity? So now I'm like, this is my mission in life to help other women make
Yep.
the kind of transformation I made, except for you don't need to take 2 to 3 years to do this haphazard meandering process like I did through the
Right.
12 steps of recovery.
Yep. You just described self-authority. I mean,
Yeah.
everything that you just talked about was just
Oh, goody.
yes. Oh
And
my
we can
god.
plan that, people.
I mean, so many things that you said are things that I also say, so it's just great. It's great for people to hear that. Well, going back to speaking up for yourself and being authentic, right? What do you tell women who are worried that you're gonna make some people unhappy, you're gonna upset some people, or something's not gonna get done, right?
Yeah.
Because you set boundaries. How to accept the fact that
Mhm.
you might piss somebody off,
Mhm.
something might not get done, and be okay with that.
Yeah. So it's not being okay with that. It's being okay with the feelings we have because of that. So it's
Uh-huh.
really, it's all about feelings, right? So this is the internal safety that I've been talking about.
Okay.
That discomfort does not mean danger. And I want to say something
Okay.
about discomfort. There's basically two types of discomfort. There's this discomfort of growth. I'm growing and changing. And then there's the discomfort of dysfunction. So most of us have been living with the discomfort of dysfunction for probably decades.
Right,
Here's
right,
the discomfort of dysfunction. It's never ending and it's going to get worse over time. So just you can bank on that. So you could pick that discomfort or you could pick the other discomfort, which is the discomfort of growth, which is actually finite because it's uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. You're stepping outside of your previous identity, for example, as a helper person. And but what's going to happen is you're going to get used to it over time and it's no longer going to be uncomfortable. And there's healing on the other side. So which discomfort do you want? The never ending, getting worse, dysfunctional discomfort, or the finite discomfort of growth where there's healing on the other side? So understanding those things. Discomfort is part of life. Discomfort is not danger. Discomfort does not mean you've done something wrong. So, learning what do I need to do to stay with myself? For me, it's often pairing the nervous system something, the hand on the chest, the breathing, the getting into the moment, and also the things that I say to myself. Like, I'm not responsible for their reaction. So, let's say that I've been doing something in your life for you that's making your life easier for decades, right? And then I stop. You're gonna be upset, and guess what? You get to be upset because it's upsetting when your life is easier and it's not. But your feelings are your feelings. They're not mine. You're responsible for your feelings, just like I'm responsible for my feelings.
right. That's right.
So,
How you manage
can
them.
like, for me, saying it's not happening to me was super helpful to me, super helpful. A friend of mine in recovery, I was talking about my brother one day. I was really upset about something he was going through, and she just gently put her hand on my shoulder and she goes, "Barb, it's not happening to you." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's not. I've been acting like it's happening to me." So we act like those people's feelings are our responsibility, like it's happening to us. So saying things to yourself like it's not happening to me, and also they get to be upset. It's upsetting. So they're either going to find someone else to make their life easier, or they're going to start doing it themselves, or some combination of those things.
Mhm.
Not your business. So a huge part of building healthy boundaries is really figuring out what's mine and what's not mine. Like I thought kind of everything was mine, except for there were certain things that were mine that I wasn't taking responsibility for, And so
Right.
it's, like for me, it's a lot of telling yourself stuff. The other thing I mentioned earlier, I don't think I realized how important my step group was to me because they said to me things like, "Barb, keep your hands away from the keyboard. Like, don't respond to that email." Or, "Are you sure you want to say it that way?" Or, "You're not a bad person. You deserve to set this boundary." So, having people on your side, like humans are wired for connected. We're protected when we're connected. So having someone who's on your side, who's going to support you. And I think if you're setting a really difficult boundary or you're having a really difficult conversation, bookend that conversation with someone who is emotionally supportive of you and not emotionally involved in the situation. So they can help you process your difficult feelings and reassure you both before and after the conversation. The first time that happened for me, Elaine, I couldn't believe it. I handled everything as an adult. I mean, I was in my 50s when this happened, and I didn't know what it was like to share with someone else. It was like they divided the difficult feelings between me and them. because they knew where I was, they knew what I was doing, they knew what I was going through, and they were checking in with me later. They actually prayed for me. She was like, "Do you want me to pray for you before you go?" And I'm like, "Yes, please." And I couldn't get over how much less of a burden it was, because when I grew up, there was no adult support for my giant little kid feelings, and I just had to learn how to just deal with my feelings on my own, and I powered through my life doing that. So having people to support you, but the problem for many of us with poor boundaries is the people we have around us are like us or the mirror of us
Right.
who are the takers. And so identifying, like for me, I learning to ask for help was vital, but also, oh my God, was it hard and also very humbling, because what I learned was I was asking the wrong people for help. I was asking the people I've been rescuing, fixing, and saving who can't even help themselves. So, how could they possibly help me? And so, I had to start developing a network of people, which I got in recovery, who actually have the capacity to help me and have the ability to follow through. And that will also reciprocate and be like, "Hey, Barb, I need you to help me too." Because if there's help only going in one direction in a relationship, that's not a healthy relationship.
Right. Right. And, it's also not doing the people around us any favors because, like you said, they don't learn how to manage their emotions and they don't learn how to problem solve and they don't learn how to grow.
Right. Right. And it's not your job to teach them that. So, like
No.
this Al-Anon, the CoDA that I talked about, those programs are full of people who want the loved ones in their lives to step up to the plate. And
Mhm.
a lot of them don't. Some of them do, but
Right.
they can't and won't ever step up to
Right.
the plate if you're standing on the plate in front of them.
Right.
Right? Do you know Dr. Becky at Good Inside? She's a parenting expert. She's phenomenal. Because part of my recovery is reparenting. And I tell
Mhm.
all my fellows in recovery, follow this woman. So I just watched this video of her the other day, and she talked about your job as a parent is to prepare your kids for the road, not to prepare the road for your kids. There will be bumps in the road. You need to teach your kids how to manage bumps. So she said, if your
Right.
kid wants something really badly and they don't get it, that's good. You're not going to
Mhm.
tell your kid that, but
Right.
it's good because it builds resilience. Because if
Yeah.
they go out into the world never having dealt with a problem before, they don't know how to handle it, right? Same thing as an adult when you're constantly rescuing, fixing, and saving other people. Your job isn't to make sure the road has no bumps in it.
Mhm.
Your job is to help them build the resilience, except for that, if you're an adult and they're an adult, it's actually not your job. Your job is to build your own resilience and let them figure it out for themselves. And maybe they will and maybe they won't, but they absolutely will not if you're
Right.
constantly rescuing them. They don't, why would they?
Right. Exactly. I want to talk about the bigger picture here, which is, you know, how do we change this cultural dynamic that we have? I mean, I know that you help individuals, I help individuals,
Yeah.
but something that I'm also passionate about is the larger picture of empowering women
Mm,
to be more
yeah.
self-sufficient emotionally, right?
Yeah.
Mentally, right?
Yeah.
And, I call it, that's what I call self-authority is
Yeah.
to,
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked me this. So, what I haven't said is I'm actually a sociologist by training. I have a master's degree in sociology,
oh
and I
my
came out of
gosh.
graduate school wanting to level the playing field. And for me, that was
Yes.
primarily race, gender, and sexual orientation. It doesn't mean that the other isms don't bother me, but those have been. And when I got into recovery, that did not go away. It kind of went to the side. And my main mission has been to heal the world. And what I've realized in the last couple of years, Elaine, is that actually those missions are together. Here's why. Because one of the most important things I learned as a sociologist is yes, it is at the macro level, at the societal level, where we have structures of inequality that are created and recreated. However, it's at the micro level, at the personal interactional level, where we can weaken and disrupt those structures of inequality.
Right.
So the individual people in those institutions, whether they're actual institutions like a university or institutions of like the educational institution, can weaken and disrupt those by saying, not towing the line, not doing the thing. And so what I realized is because my target market is professional women who say yes when they really want to say no and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. Well, women who do those things are not going to make inroads into the social structures of society. So one of the ways I do it is not just by individually coaching women and having my podcast and talking about it, but I do speaking engagements to organizations that either serve or are comprised of professional women. And one of the beauties of speaking at an organization about this stuff is after the talk, after the workshop, after the all day event, they have a vocabulary and they're all on the same page about a few things. And they start to see, oh, maybe we have some policies and procedures here that actually lead people to abuse their mental health. Many organizations do, and so, that's what I would say, that the more individual women we have, especially women in positions of leadership who are saying no when they really mean no and who are taking care of themselves and filling their own cup first
Right.
so that they can pour from the overflow rather than trying to pour from an empty cup, and then model that, and maybe also teach it to their subordinates. That's what's going to make the change.
Yep. Wow. And that we could talk for another hour, I'm sure.
Clearly, yes, clearly, yes.
This was great, and I think it's a great place to stop. What takeaway would you like to share with women? What, if anything, what would you like them to take away from all of this?
Yeah, I would say you cannot create internal safety by focusing on the external world, by what other people are thinking, what they're doing, whether they're upset. You have to focus internally. What's going on in here? And what do I need? Like, what kind of support do I need from myself, from other people? Whether that's nervous system support, the things that you're saying to yourself, the friend who helps you set the boundary that, you call on the phone when you're spiraling and, they help you get out of that spiral and get you into reality of you're an amazing, powerful woman of dignity and grace, whatever that is. But you cannot create internal safety by focusing externally.
Right. Yeah. I love how you pair, setting boundaries with achieving internal safety.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had this epiphany last year that that's what it's really about, and I think I actually had the epiphany while guesting on the podcast, and once I had that epiphany, it was something that I basically have been swimming and swirling around, but I had
Mhm.
never named it, and once I named it, it helped me retroactively understand really everything that I do, and so now I feel pretty confident in saying every single podcast I've done this year, I have used the term internal safety at least once, because that's what we're all seeking. And once we have that, then we can hold the boundaries, the external boundaries.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Barb. Really, I've enjoyed this very much, and
Me
just
too.
so
Thank you.
full of and helpful information. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm so honored to be invited, especially at the very beginning of your podcast. This feels really good.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to have you.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Self Authority Podcast. One of my favorite takeaways from the conversation is Barb's reminder that you cannot create internal safety by focusing on the external world. The more we rely on other people's approval, reactions, or validation to determine whether we're okay, the harder it becomes to trust ourselves. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to like and subscribe and share it with a friend. Check out the show notes to learn more about Barb, her podcast, and her work helping women build healthier boundaries. Until next time, remember, self authority begins when you care more about what you think of yourself than what other people think of you. I'm Elaine Belsen, the Self Authority Coach. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Well,